Welcome to the Rabbi's Message. This is Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky bringing you a weekly message on the Torah portion. The Torah portion that will be read in synagogues throughout the world is Parshat Toldot. Toldot comes from the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit, and it opens up with the dialogue and the interesting episode that takes place as Isaac and Rebekah give birth to Esau and Jacob. And it tells us the struggle that Rebekah felt as the twins were in her womb. Esau would always move and get excited when she would walk by an area of idol worshipping, of things that were not proper. He would want to emerge his mother's womb. And it says every time they would walk, Rebekah would walk by a place of the studying of Torah, where acts of goodness and kindness were taking place. Jacob would want to emerge, get involved, be part of it. And she went to the elders, and she said, "Tell me, what's going on here?" This is before the times of sonograms. And they said, there are two nations within your womb. One nation is going to be involved in study, in kindness, compassion, caring, commitment, and one will be the opposite. And all of a sudden, we read about the birth of Esau, that his name was Esav in Hebrew, comes from the word asui, which means he looked mature physically. When he was a young little infant, he came out sort of developed in the sense that he had hair on his head, on his arms. And that's why he was named Esau. Jacob, fighting to be the elder, grabs onto the heel of Esau, but was not the one that came out first. Hence he was called Jacob, because in Hebrew Jacob is Yaakov, which means that he held on to the ankle, so to speak, the base of the foot, and that's why he was called Jacob. These two brothers are raised, and we have an interesting episode that takes place that eventually leads to Esau selling the right of the first birth. In Jewish law, there's a fundamental law, and that is that if you have two children, the elder one is known as the Bechor, or the Bechorah. And if it's a boy, the law tells us that he would inherit a double portion. Being over here, it was two sons. They were twins, but still there was one that came out immersed first from the mother's womb, and that was Esau. And when it came later on to the blessings from their father Isaac, Jacob wanted to make sure that he receives the first blessing. So the Torah portion covers this interesting story of the birth of Jacob and Esau. It discovers the story of Jacob who buys the birthright from Esau, and Isaac relocates to a place called Gerar due to a famine that breaks out in the land. Esau eventually marries, and then we read about Jacob taking Esau's blessing. And we conclude with Isaac instructs Jacob to get married, and then final verses, we describe how Esau marries Ishmael's daughter. What I want to pause on for a moment that I think has a profound message is this interesting dialogue that takes place between Esau and his father, and later on leads to Jacob acquiring the first blessings. You see, it's interesting when you think about this episode. We have Rebekah, their mother, standing on the side, over-listening to the way Esau came before his father and wanted to bring him a fine meal, went to the field. He understood his father was on his deathbed and a blessing was important. When Rebekah hears this, she runs to Jacob and she says, we got to do something. We got to make sure that Esau is not the one that receives the blessing, but it is you. What's interesting is, you might ask, didn't Isaac see? Didn't Isaac see the way one son was engrossed in his teaching? One son was engaged in acts of kindness. One son was compassionate. One son was loving. And the other was just the opposite. Hunting, wild, abrupt, disengaged. And the verse says that the eyes of Jacob were not able to see. Literally meaning he became blind in his older age. And all the commentaries discuss this, and they say, what happened? And one of the basic commentaries, known as Rashi, describes this 11th century scholar, says, hey, it was the smoke of all the different idol worshippings and sacrifices that were brought by Esau and his wives and their descendants that went into this righteous person known as Isaac, and they caused him blindness. That's one of the answers that's given. But when we see something, we have to ask an obvious question. And that is, didn't Isaac realize my son is just not acting properly? I have one that's righteous and one that's not. We find that all of a sudden, Esau's standing, ready to give his father the most delightful and delicious meal. And the words from the verse are kitzayid befiv, which means, loosely translated, he tricked him. He would ask his father these deep questions. The concept of tithing, which means all your crop, 10% needs to be given away. Your personal financial portfolio, 10% needs to be given away to charity. And he would ask his father, does he have to tithe salt? And the answer is no. Too small. There is no law of tithing of salt. But he would ask questions like this in order to invoke within his father that, wow, look how careful I am, that I'm even concerned about salt. If salt needs to be tithed or not. So when Rebekah sees this and watches, and never once confronts her husband and says, I'm sorry, honey, but this son is just not acting properly. I see what's going on. She comes up with an interesting plan. The plan is that when Esau is out preparing the most delightful meal to receive the final blessing from his father, Rebekah says, I will provide that meal, and instead of putting before Isaac, Esau, I will make Jacob stand there. And she shares this plan with her son, Jacob. And Jacob says, what are you, joking? We're two different types of individuals. He's a hairy person, and I'm not. The moment I extend my arms to my father, he will feel my arms and he'll say, this is not Jacob. I know who Jacob is. So his mother says, don't worry, I have a plan. And she takes the skin of an animal. She places it upon the arms of Jacob. And she says, if your father asks, let me feel your hands. Don't worry, extend your arm. And when he touches it, he'll say, yes, this is you. And we come across this fascinating verse. And the verse calls out and says that Isaac calls to Jacob and he says, approach me. I want to see if you are my son Esau or not. And the next verse says that Jacob approaches Isaac, his father, and he gives him a kiss. And what does Isaac respond? He says, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And right away the next verse describes he couldn't recognize because the hands were covered, and because they were covered, he was not able to see, to tell if this was actually Jacob or not. And sure enough, it says he ate, he drank, and he goes ahead and extends the most delightful and beautiful blessing to the son that he thinks is Esau, but it is Jacob. And just to tell you what happens is, Esau comes in and says, Dad, I'm here with the food. And the father says, I just ate. So the father realizes that by mistake he gave the blessing to Jacob, not to Esau. Esau obviously becomes angry, and it goes on to a dialogue that he says, Dad, isn't there more than one blessing? Don't you have power to give more than one blessing? And eventually his father gives him his own personal blessing. What I want to focus on is this unique and interesting dialogue. And there's an obvious question that needs to be raised. Here Isaac is blind. His wife Rebecca comes up with a fascinating encounter. How one can sort of release the blessing from Isaac and make it his. How Jacob can receive the blessing. What does he say? He says, I feel your hands. Your hands are the hands of Isaac. But the voice is the voice of Jacob. And he goes ahead and he continues to give him a blessing. How does this make sense? If it doesn't match, Isaac should have said, you can't fool me. You can't con me here and say that you are really Esau. I know you're Jacob. You sound like Jacob. The hands are the hands of Esau. How does this make sense? Why would the next verse or a couple of verses go on to explain how all of a sudden Isaac goes along with it and gives him a blessing, this most beautiful and profound blessing, that you'll be multiplied many nations, you'll be like the sea, the fish in the sea, and you'll have everything you need in life. All the nations of the world will bow to you, and you'll be wealthy, and those that bless you will be blessed, those that curse you are cursed. How does this all make sense? Such a profound blessing. When at the end of the day, the hands and the voice did not match up. Think of this episode of someone that you would know. Their mind is working. Isaac was sharp. He was able to give a profound blessing. Why did he go on? Why did he continue to give the blessing to Jacob when he clearly understood that this was really not Esau? And perhaps the explanation is as follows. You see, that verse that describes the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau, is not just a verse describing the encounter between Jacob and Esau, between Isaac and Jacob. It's not just telling us how Isaac is about to give the blessing, and his response and his encounter to Jacob, what he says. But it's really a message for life. It's a message for goodness. It's a message to understand how one engages in positive attitudes. One engages in positive interactions. One inspires every moment of their life to do good. Good always prevails. There's no such thing that you do good and negative comes out of it. When we go back and we look at this verse and we see what happens, it says that Jacob approaches his father and he gives him a kiss. His father says, "Son, I know who you are. Don't think you're fooling me. You can't fool me. I'm your father. I understand your concern. I understand that you thought I was about to give this great blessing to Esau. But I want to teach you a message for life. And the message for life is as follows. That as long as there's a voice to the voice of Jacob, as long as you understand who you are, you're not intimidated. You're not quiet. You don't stand on the side and allow someone else to trample over you. There's a voice there. When there's a voice of Jacob, there is a success of Jacob. When there's a voice of Jacob, there's the blessing of Jacob. When there's the voice of Jacob, when there's the kol, in Hebrew we call it, the confidence, the measure of understanding that, wow, I know who I am. The first chief rabbi of Israel said that every nation of the world has a message, and the Jewish people have a message as well. He says, why is it that all the nations of the world, if you had to summarize what they believe, what they think, you can say it in a nutshell. You ask a Jew what they believe, they put on this protective mode, protective shield, and they say, well, this is what I think is right, I'm almost positive. I want to believe this way. The first chief rabbi, his name was Jacob Isaac Cook, said as follows. He said, the problem is that every nation of the world got up to the podium, they said what they had to say, and they got off. They understand their message, it's clear, it's crystal. The problem with the Jewish people, and primarily today with the land of Israel, is that they're stuttering at the podium. They get up, but they're not clear in who they are. They can't turn to the world and say, this is what I believe and this is what I know is right because this is who I am. They apologize for being who they are. They say we're not always this. We could be better. This is what we want. We would like. There's stuttering, uncertainty, lack of confidence. Isaac tells Jacob, you want to be a leader. You want the blessing. You want that first blessing. There has to be the kol of Jacob. There has to be that voice, that understanding, that outcry of what Jacob cares for. Because if not, then it will be the hands of Esau. If there is no voice to the voice of Jacob, then all of a sudden there is the hands of Esau. The mundane, the physicality, the negativeness, the concept that this world has destruction, people that take advantage of others, knock someone when they're down. These are all the traits of Esau. Kitzayid befiv. He was a con artist. When you allow them to prosper, then it becomes the hands of Esau. God forbid it could lead to war. God forbid it could lead to destruction. The message to the house of Jacob, the message to goodness and kindness is simple. One has to stand up. You have to believe in who you are. You have to say, I am the voice of Jacob. I understand my mission. I understand my purpose. I might be the one that lives in the hut, so to speak, as the verse says. Lives in the tent. On the outside might look that flashy. But in the core, the essence of who we are, what you believe in, what you care for, what you're willing to stand on the line and say, until here and no more. This is what's important to me. This is what makes a difference in my life. That's the power or the blessing of Jacob. That's what it means. The voice is the voice of Jacob. Because when the voice is strong, then there's a voice to Jacob. But if it's the opposite, then unfortunately there is a voice, and there are hands to the hands of Esau. I hope we take this message from this week's Torah portion, and we realize how we can incorporate this in our daily life. How moments we say, it's what I say, it's how I communicate, it's how I show affection and I care for another human being. If you do this, you're blessed with the blessing of Jacob. If not, then it's the opposite. I want to wish you all a tremendous week, a week of only joy and happiness, a week of inspiration, and hopefully this profound message will be able to incorporate in our daily lives. That our voices, our interactions, our encounters will always have the message of the voice of Jacob. You're listening to the Rabbi's message. We'll be back same time, same place next week. This is Rabbi Elazar Bogomilsky.